in. We are now recording, I hope, and I'm going to next pass this to LWVNAZ.
Greetings. I'm really excited about the program today, and a special greetings to those of you who are coming from around the state. I see that a number of people from other league chapters, and that's just great. So thank you for promoting the program. What we'll be doing today is I'll share a few comments and let you know about some upcoming activities. And then we'll, of course, do the speaker introduction presentation and followed by Q&A.
Yeah, someone's not on mute.
Yeah, so
please mute yourself.
And then we can go to the next slide. Okay, everybody needs to get on mute.
Lynn, I don't have access to mute because I'm projecting. So if you can go to participants, you can mute whoever that is.
Okay,
I think we're good.
Marianne?
Yes.
Can you move to the next slide?
Sorry. I'm sorry. I was paying attention to mute.
Okay, so a couple of things here. First, you might have noticed we have a new name, League of Women Voters of Northern Arizona. What I'd say about that is, for those of you in Greater Verde Valley, it will be the same programs and initiatives you've always seen, but the addition is that now we will have Flagstaff in all of Coconino County. And so with that, we have a couple of new board members, and you'll be seeing in our monthly communications editions of things going on in Flagstaff, and hopefully we'll be able to bring in more Flagstaff speakers. And so it'll be more of the same, only a little bit larger. So welcome to those of you coming in from Flagstaff, and we're delighted about this. Coming up this month, as you know, it's been very busy leading up to the election. And so it's a little quieter this month, although we still have a lot going on. First off, on January 28th is Let's Talk Politics. And for those of you who haven't participated before, it's your opportunity to talk about what's going on politically in the world. Get it off your chest in a safe environment. If you'd like to join us, we're always open to having new members and enjoy that. And here's some information about how to get connected. And it'll also be posted in a link in the chat. Next, we have January 30th, our League of Women Voters Northern Arizona Book Club. That's from 1 to 3. This month is Let the People Pick the President by Jesse Wegman. If you'd like to join, we have the information there. Contact blatrell@gmail.com. We're celebrating the 6th anniversary, and we've got quite a list of books we've read these last 6 years. And we'd be delighted to have new and old members join us on that. Next slide. I also want to put in a plug for next month's education program. It's called Cut, Paste, Legislate. Who funds organizations that write legislation like ALEC? Who's writing those policies that pass on to legislators across the country? This presentation will be presented by Nick Penzenstadler from USA Today and Rob Odell at Arizona Republic. I believe that they had put together an article on this previously, and we have information that you can register to. If there's any difficulty or you lose that information, you can always send us an email at LWVNAZ@gmail.com, and we'll also get that information to you. And before I hand it off to Marie, a special thanks to Marie Helt, who will be doing the introduction and Q&A, because she put together both of these programs, the one today and the upcoming program. So thank you so much. On membership, if you're new to us, we always are delighted to have new members or renewals, and we have information there. And we also, if you would like to donate to our tax-free education fund, which supports our activities around voters education and voters programs and getting out the vote, there's a link for that too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marie Held, and we're really excited about our program today.
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Marie Helt. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters and also on the board of our co-sponsor, Unify Sedona, a Rainbow Alliance. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Stanna Slater. And you'll see that we've described her as attorney, mentor, and activist. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about all of those roles. She was born Jeffrey Slater, and she is an honorably discharged former captain in the U.S. Army Reserve. Stanna received her law degree in 1989 from the University of Denver College of Law, where she was a published staff writer on the University of Denver Law Review. Stanna founded her Scottsdale law practice, the Law Office of Jeffrey S. Slater, in 1999. And she focuses on civil litigation, estate planning, and public policy advocacy for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. And that already gets us into her role as mentor and activist. She's the former chair of the Arizona State Bar's Committee on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, where she launched a petition before the Arizona Supreme Court seeking to end discrimination against transgender people in all Arizona state court proceedings. She also served on the Arizona State Bar Task Force to bolster the lawyer ethics rule, which prohibits unlawful bias and prejudice against minority groups, including transgender people. She currently serves as the LGBTQ liaison for the city of Scottsdale and was recognized by that city in 2016 as a diversity champion. And she also serves on the Scottsdale Police Chiefs Community Engagement Committee. And there's so much more. But in the spring of 2019, Unify Sedona and the Arizona Community Foundation co-sponsored a one-day transgender summit for the whole state of Arizona right here in Sedona. Stanna was one of our featured speakers. She spoke forcefully and impressively on the topic, no justice, no peace. But what really stood out to me that day were the many other speakers who acknowledged and thanked Stanna for her mentoring and her advocacy on their behalf. It is my pleasure now to introduce Stanna Slater.
Thank you, everyone, especially our sponsors, for allowing me to be here. And I want to thank all of our participants who are listening in today for their interest in this subject that is so important to me personally and to so many people I know and try to advocate for. Today, I suppose I have the dubious honor of speaking on voter rights during a week when our democracy is literally under siege. This is very upsetting to me, as I'm sure it is to all of you. I apologize in advance that if I seem a bit distracted during the presentation, it's largely because while I've been fighting for the rights of people who are gay or transgender, non-binary or queer for a dozen years, right now it looks like our whole democracy is in jeopardy and the rights of literally everyone are at risk. The fact that all of you are willing to take time out from following and monitoring the current events to hear about the plight of the LGBTQ community really means a lot to me personally. So when I say thank you, I genuinely mean that. The topic today is the status of LGBTQ plus rights in Arizona. And perhaps the main reason for a topic like that is that many people, especially in Arizona, assume that simply because we have marriage equality since the year 2015, that all LGBTQ people have all of the same civil rights that heterosexual Arizonans have. However, that cannot be further from the truth. In fact, a married gay couple in Arizona can be legally denied a table at a restaurant in most of the cities of our state today. You may be asking, how on earth can that be possible? And I'd like to address today how and why that's the current state of the law in Arizona. Before we dive into those specific details, I'd like to apologize that we're having to do this by Zoom. Of course, the COVID risks are necessitating this, but it does take away from our ability to interact more directly with each other. And what I mean by that is, while all of you may be able to see and hear me, I can't see or hear any of you. This awkward dynamic that we have under the Zoom format, I confess, causes me to be a little less confident about my delivery. In fact, I don't even want to try to tell a joke or try using any humor. After all, if I did, I wouldn't know if anyone had laughed or even smiled. So today I'm mostly going to stick to a script. And in that process, a lot of you are probably going to develop the impression about me that Stanna seems like a really stiff and boring person. If you reach that conclusion about me, let me assure you that you're absolutely right. But in my defense, I do want to say that it's because I happen to be a lawyer. I also apologize that during the course of our program today, that I may share with you some information that many of you already know. And I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence. I don't know everyone who's participating today or what their level of knowledge and understanding is with respect to the LGBT community and the laws that impact the community. Besides, I would like to try to get, as briefly as I can, all of our participants up to a foundational level of understanding before we dive into what may be some complicated issues relating to the LGBT community and our limited protections under the law. We could talk about this subject of the status of LGBTQ plus rights in Arizona for hours. There literally is no end to the stories, the details, and the challenges that are being faced by the community right now. In fact, many of the participants in this program today probably have a story of their own that they could tell. Their story might break the hearts of many of us based on what they've had to endure as a member of the LGBTQ community. So I'm going to try to cover some general topics as briefly and concisely as I can. And I think that maybe then when we open up the program to questions, we can really dive into the nitty-gritty details of what's at the heart of what our participants really want to know, need to know, and feel strongly about asking or communicating. When we've completed our program today, My hope is that everyone will leave with a confident understanding of the following three general but nonetheless important questions.
Stanna, excuse me, this is Mary Ann. I really apologize, but we seem to be having some kind of sound feedback problem. I'm going to pause the recording for a second.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I apologize that I'm still learning the system, and hopefully we'll perfect this and come back another day and do the topic again with fewer glitches. Certainly my contributions to those glitches will hopefully be gone and never to be experienced again. I'm going to test my ability with the Zoom system really explicitly right now by trying to load a slide for everyone. And this slide will hopefully communicate to everyone what I believe are the three general questions that we hope to address today during this program. One of them is, who are the LGBTQ plus people? Most of you probably think you already know and may know, but let's establish that today. Second, what is the status of legal rights for people who are part of the LGBTQ community in Arizona? And then third, and perhaps most importantly, what can I or you as participants in this program today do to help advance the interests of the LGBTQ community? Now, today we'll address all of this by going through the following general topics during the presentation. The first segment will deal with an analogy of umbrellas to hopefully demonstrate that the legal system has a three-tiered setup with federal, state, and local or city opportunities for protections. We'll talk about how hostile opposition to that, to LGBTQ rights, have left us with far less than that protection. And we'll talk specifically about where we are in Arizona, where the protections exist and where they don't. We'll also discuss what it means to be LGBTQ plus, talk about some definitions, and discuss a little bit about discrimination. I'll talk about the history that leads up to Arizona's current patchwork of legal protections. And then finally, describe the present tiers of that patchwork and challenge you politely, but nonetheless assertively, and certainly with conviction, to take upon yourself to take action so that the LGBT community in Arizona is more effectively protected than we currently are. So to begin this analysis, I'd like to give you a visual image of a set of umbrellas. Of course, umbrellas are designed to be protective. And in this picture, we have three umbrellas that I'd like to have all of you think of as analogizing or demonstrating the federal government protections at the top, the state court, or the state rather, level of protections in the middle, and the local or city protections at the very bottom. Because we have so much hostility in Arizona and the country at large toward the LGBT community. Plus, we have what appears by all objective measures to be a broken, dysfunctional government at all levels. What we have, instead of 3 protective umbrellas, is something else more like this. The result for those of us in Arizona who are part of the LGBT community is an inconsistent and confusing patchwork of grossly inadequate protections. Essentially, that's how a gay couple can get married, yet be refused service in a restaurant in most of the cities of our state today. So what does it mean to be LGBTQ+? Well, the acronym, first of all, means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and most would say queer, some would say questioning, and then plus represents a number of other letters that could be used to describe intersex or affirming, people who may not be gay or transgender, but are supportive. And there's even non-binary, which are people who might be part of the transgender community or may not necessarily identify as such, but who simply don't want any gender to be assigned to their person. And those individuals are out there, and they often will utilize pronouns that are not traditional, like him or her or he and she, but rather they. And these are some of the going back to the intersex component. These may be individuals who are born with ambiguous genitalia or with chromosomes that don't conform with what is found in most individuals. Unfortunately, some people would call these people for decades defective, birth defective. We know better than that, but nonetheless, that's a specific form of discrimination that people who are intersex may have encountered. Discrimination, of course, is very problematic to the whole community. In fact, those of us who are transgender for many years were literally considered to be living in violation of many states' criminal codes simply for dressing differently than the gender we were assigned at birth. Similarly, people who were gay or lesbian were considered to be in violation of state criminal codes for their sexual orientation. This discrimination against the LGBTQ+ community was further strengthened against us by the medical industry itself, because for many years until just recently, the psychological and psychiatric associations in America had, well, they regarded being gay or transgender as a mental illness. So many individuals of the LGBTQ community were viewed as criminal and or mentally ill. And this, of course, led to ostracizing and rejection, violence, any type of pushback and hostility that you can imagine has been endured by members of the LGBTQ community. We know of some horrific cases that have made the media. Arizona has had its share of horrific cases. And I can tell you that in my case personally, I have been shunned by many of my own family members as a consequence of owning my gender identity. So discrimination is clearly a problem that goes beyond simply finding a table at a restaurant where we can be fed. Let's talk about the 3 tiers of potential legal protection. First, at the federal level, one would think that there is a statutory law passed by Congress that includes people who are gay, transgender, non-binary, intersex, etc., from having to endure discrimination. However, all of the efforts that have ever been made to pass the Equality Act, which would provide such protection, have failed. The traditional legislation that provided protections for discrimination that provided protections from discrimination is known as the Civil Rights Act. And it, of course, for over 50 years has provided protections to members of American society based on traditional classes of protection, such as a race, religion, sex. Up until 6 months ago, that protective legislation was never regarded as providing any protection to the LGBT community. Fortunately, 6 months ago, the United States Supreme Court rendered its decision in the case of Bostock versus Clayton County. And in that, the court held that with respect to the workplace, people who are gay or transgender are indeed protected from discrimination. And most significantly, the court held that it is by virtue of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the protection in that act based on sex. Traditionally, the word sex in the act had been regarded simply as gender based on the traditional notion of a binary gender system assigned to individuals at their birth and applying only in that sense until their death. However, the US Supreme Court shocked the world with a favorable decision otherwise, stating that being gay or transgender is a matter of sex. And as a consequence, the Civil Rights Act protection against discrimination or from discrimination based on sex extends to cover those who are gay or transgender. This was particularly shocking because it came after the current administration or president had appointed 2 new conservative justices to the court. And what contributed to the shocking nature of the opinion was that this wasn't a close vote by the court. Ordinarily, the controversial cases are decided on a 5-4 basis, but this one was 6-3. And that gives me some hope and optimism for the future of those of us who are part of the LGBT community, and optimism for the future of our country in general. Unfortunately, that case only applied to that single issue, which is the entitlement of gay and transgender people to be protected from discrimination in the workplace. It didn't address the other aspects of protection that the Civil Rights Act, and some of the important areas there include public accommodations, like a restaurant where you could be denied a table, and housing. Plus, there is the implication on education. So right now, we have a federal government umbrella of protection that doesn't specify that individuals are protected by statutory law based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. But we have a US Supreme Court case that says, with respect to the workplace, individuals who are gay or transgender are protected from discrimination. Now, a compelling analogous argument could be made that that was enough to protect us in the workplace, or not just in the workplace, but in public accommodations, housing, and education. Because after all, the Civil Rights Act, as it used the term sex, applied in these other settings simultaneously. But until we have a case from the US Supreme Court saying that there are going to be people who advocate that those protections don't exist. So right now, from the federal government, all we have is protection in the workplace based on our sexual orientation or gender identity. At the state level, here in Arizona, we have nothing. Our legislature has considered bills that would provide protection to Arizonans based on their sexual orientation and or gender identity, but those efforts to pass a law have all failed. At the state level, we have at least some protection within the court system in Arizona. The state court system, in general, for litigants and parties and lawyers who practice in Arizona state courts or otherwise appear in state courts to have their disputes resolved. And that, I believe, comes from the effort that I and several of my colleagues, along with the support of the State Bar of Arizona, made back in 2015 to bring and express into the discrimination against transgender people in all Arizona state courts. The reason for this is that the lawyer ethics rule, that there is a lawyer ethics rule that applies to all lawyers that prohibits them from discriminating against anyone in the course of representing a client based on, among other classifications, sexual orientation and gender identity. That ethics rule has existed for just shy of 20 years. But again, it only applied to lawyers, and it was an ethics rule, nothing that necessarily could cause somebody to be sued for damages or imprisoned, jailed for violating. They might have disciplinary action against their license, but otherwise that was the extent. But it still nonetheless was a significant factor that applied throughout the state to all lawyers. Oddly, though, while this ethics rule applies and has applied for nearly 20 years to lawyers, there was no corresponding rule that applied to judges in Arizona or to litigants. But there is a judicial ethics rule that prohibits judges from either engaging in or allowing in their courtroom discrimination against a list of protected classifications. Unfortunately, that list of protected classifications did not include gender identity or the transgender community. And so, with my colleagues and with the support of the State Bar of Arizona, I petitioned the court, the Arizona Supreme Court, to add the words gender identity as a protected classification in the judicial ethics rule so that all state court proceedings would be free of any discrimination against transgender people specifically. Excuse me. Unfortunately, the Arizona Supreme Court denied the petition that I and my colleagues had filed, but in doing so, the court gave an unusual ruling that was beneficial. And that's that while the petition to change the judicial ethics rule was denied, the court admonished judges that they are not to engage in bias or prejudice, and that the list of protected classes in the rule as it currently exists is illustrative only and is not exhaustive. So what I and many others take that to mean is that the court was saying, we're not going to change the rules language to add gender identity specifically for protection. We don't need to, because Slater, you're already covered, and so are all transgender people in Arizona. So we have what I believe is a bit of protection there at the state level. But again, that doesn't provide any specific protection otherwise or beyond state court legal proceedings. This is all found in the ethics rules applicable to lawyers and judges in representative and litigation settings. That leaves a whole lot uncovered from the standpoint of the state umbrella. Let's now look at the local level, the umbrella of protection that exists or potentially exists at the city or local level. In Arizona, there are only 5 cities currently that have an ordinance which prohibits discrimination based on, among other things, sexual orientation and gender identity. Phoenix is one, Tucson is another, Sedona, Tempe, and I believe it's Flagstaff. All the other cities provide no protection at the city local level. So with what little exists at the federal level and what little exists at the state level and what little exists at the local level, here in Arizona, you can see that many who are LGBTQ are left only partially protected from discrimination. Hopefully, this bothers you as a participant in this voter education program today. If so, and you feel compelled, I would like to politely challenge you on what you could do to help in the situation that leaves so many Arizonans unprotected. One of the things you can do is to continue to become aware and informed about the LGBTQ community, who we are, and what our challenges are. But also you can continue to become aware and informed about the positions held by your elected officials on the issues of LGBTQ non-discrimination. As you learn those positions of your elected officials, I would encourage you to find out what they are, not only at the federal level, like where do the candidates for president stand, but also, and where do our senators for Congress and our representatives for Congress stand, but also at the state level. Where do your state representatives stand with respect to the LGBT community and protecting the community from discrimination? And even still, I would encourage you to educate yourself on where do your local elected officials stand at city council and the mayor. And even if you're in a city like Sedona that already has protections, I would encourage you to find out what's happening in other cities besides just your own. Excuse me. The reason I say that is that right now, the city of Scottsdale, which does not have a non-discrimination ordinance, is in the process of new leadership and a reconsideration of whether an ordinance should be passed to protect the LGBTQ community. I'm hopeful and optimistic, though cautiously, that this effort in Scottsdale will prevail. As the LGBTQ liaison for the city of Scottsdale, I've been pleasantly surprised to learn that my city has, in the last 3.5 years during the time I've been their LGBTQ liaison, taken significant strides to try to make sure everyone feels welcome in Scottsdale, despite the lack of a non-discrimination ordinance. Some of those steps that the city leaders have taken include having voted 6-1 to send a letter to the state legislature telling the legislature that this is an important issue and that it warrants the legislature taking action at the state level to pass a statutory law that protects the LGBTQ community from discrimination. The city also added to its existing employee non-discrimination policy by authorizing healthcare benefits to their employees and families for transgender healthcare. The city of Scottsdale also participated in visible fashion in the 2019 Pride Parade in downtown Phoenix. These steps by the city of Scottsdale, in my view, have been big, but it would be so much nicer if the city would pass a non-discrimination ordinance. And I will certainly be doing what I can to try to encourage that from my position inside the city as the LGBTQ liaison. Even if you're not a resident of Scottsdale, you can certainly become engaged in the dialogue. You may not live here, but you come here to visit, play golf, shop, things like that. And while you're here, and those you know who are LGBTQ remain unprotected by virtue of the umbrella of local protections not being in place. So you can say something, even if this isn't your city here in Scottsdale. But likewise, if you're in a different city that hasn't already taken that step to enact an ordinance that provides protection at that umbrella, that tiered umbrella level, I encourage you to find out where your city council members stand on this issue, and then let them know how you feel about the issue. In the end, the most important thing we can do is certainly what you League of Women Voters clearly understand, and of course Unify Sedona understands. That's vote. After educating yourself on the issues and where the elected officials stand with respect to the issues, we all need to vote, and every last vote matters and it counts at all three tiered levels that otherwise could be providing that protection, the federal, state, and local level. With that, I'd like to open up this program to questions from the audience, if there are any, and hopefully we can delve into more specific issues that some may want to discuss. Again, thank you for allowing me to present on this important subject.
I have one, Stanna, let's see, where did it go? Here's one. With the large number of private schools in Arizona, what is the state of discrimination in employment in the schools? I think is the intended question.
That's a great question. It's a complicated question. If you had asked me this 6 months ago, before the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, I would have said, we're out of luck. If you're a teacher in one of those schools and you're gay or transgender, you better keep it a secret. With Bostock, that may have changed, but it may have only changed to a certain extent, because one of the issues that the Bostock court left unresolved is the extent to which religious exemption is going to apply to this ruling in general, that in the workplace, discrimination can't be based on sexual orientation or gender identity. It's going to take probably another decision from the U.S. Supreme Court before we have a clear answer to that question. And in the interim, I would encourage anyone who's working in the setting of a private school or charter school to carefully research where their school stands on the issue of the LGBT rights, and then conduct myself as an employee accordingly, which may mean hunker down and be careful at work until the law changes. Now, simultaneously, a person like that needs to be doing all they can at the city and state level to try to affect a change in the ordinances and the state law that pertain to non-discrimination, and to seek such changes that don't allow for exemptions based on the private nature of the entity or even the religious nature of the entity.
Thank you, Stanna. I've got another question that's an excellent one. You mentioned the judicial ethics rule, and this questioner, Cami Bellis, says, I assume there's no rule for judges to remain impartial or discriminate against transgender youth in the family court system. There have been significant and harmful family court rulings against transgender youth. Can you say anything about this?
Yes, that's a very good point. I don't do family law, so I have to give that disclaimer at the outset. I have colleagues who would be much better qualified to address that specific question. But I can say that while the state standard in Arizona courts is that it's a violation of the ethics rule to discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity. What we have in family court, particularly with respect to children, is the standard that the court shall impose those standards and conditions which are in the best interests of the child. The best interests of the child. Now, many of us would say the child knows whether they're transgender, and whether not allowing them to live their authenticity as a transgender child puts them at risk of things such as depression or, God forbid, suicide. But the parents, often who are fighting over custody and decision making, are going to debate this and bring in a lot of details and information that may make the resolution by the judge in that case, or what is in fact in the best interests of the child, not entirely clear. Each case has to be viewed in an ad hoc way with the standard applied. But as you might imagine, it doesn't necessarily mean that all cases involving a transgender child or a child who has expressed transgender inclinations is going to be resolved in the same way.
Thank you, Stanna. Here's another question from Joan. Is the resistance and hostility to legislative activity regarding the LGBTQ rights, does that fall along party lines? And how do religious institutions in the state factor into the furthering or not of LGBTQ rights? Kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, that is the $64,000 question, because really the ground zero for hostility toward the LGBTQ community is the religious question. I mean, when you see court cases filed to oppose the rights of people who are gay or transgender, those cases are never filed by scientific organizations. They're always filed by religious organizations. Now, I realize that we're in a setting that precludes making statements that would be political. But I think that if viewers would educate themselves about the political parties, they will find that this is one of the dividers, one of the key dividers between the two prominent political parties. And as a consequence, many of the many elected officials who are affiliated with one or the other party tend to take the position of what that party's platform states. And this underscores the importance of voting based on what you come to know are the elected officials who have chosen to take a stand with respect to protecting LGBTQ rights. For the most part, many of your traditional religious organizations are going to side on one particular side. There are, however, a growing number of progressive Christian and other progressive spiritual organizations and churches that are sensitive to the LGBTQ issues and who are open and affirming to attendance at their services by LGBTQ community members. And I think that's a valuable topic to research, particularly if you're somebody who is spiritual, looking for a fellowship. There are those churches out there. Unfortunately, they aren't as numerous as the churches that exist based on the traditional religious organizations we know.
I'd like to just jump in for a minute and thank you, Stanna. Stanna's not being evasive in answering her question. It's just that we try to impress upon her that the League is quite cautious in our nonpartisanship. But clearly, if you do your research, you can find what your legislative positions are. And the League is firmly in favor of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We take stands on issues. We do not endorse or oppose a political party. So that's why Stanna is being a little cautious in answering this question. Thank you, Stanna.
Thank you, Marianne.
Okay, I've got a next question. Do you see in the 2021 Arizona legislative session, which begins today, do you see them taking up a statewide non-discrimination law? We had one proposed in last year's session, which got cut short because of the pandemic. Do you see one happening this year, perhaps?
I'm encouraged and happy to say I do. I have come to know several of the representatives on both sides of the political aisle at the state legislature. One side of that aisle is particularly committed to this effort. And it's not because necessarily a representative of that side of the aisle themselves are gay or transgender, rather because it is being increasingly known on both sides of the political spectrum that non-discrimination for the LGBTQ community is good for business. And what's good for business in Arizona is good for Arizona. The problem, however, is that there is still hostility among certain elected officials, despite their awareness of the benefits economically. Their constituents aren't necessarily driven by economics on this particular issue. And so it remains a difficult undertaking to pass such a bill. But I do expect that, as has happened in recent years, another similar bill will be submitted. In the past, the problem has been it wouldn't even get heard in committee, let alone make its way to the floor of either the House or the Senate in the state legislature. I'm hopeful that we continue to get closer and closer to that day where the bill, which keeps being proposed, finally becomes state law. Maybe this will be the year.
Okay, I have one last question, at least on my list. This is the last question. Joan asks, could you please comment on human trafficking and the LGBTQ vulnerable population in Arizona?
It is a serious problem. Just as human trafficking is a problem outside of the LGBTQ community, it certainly exists. And I have not devoted my advocacy so much to the issue of human trafficking, but
all day.
on the board at 1 in 10, an Arizona nonprofit that seeks and desires to help encourage LGBTQ youth and young adults. And in the time that I served on the board and since, I've developed an understanding that many youth who identify as LGBTQ are being kicked out of their homes for their sexual orientation or gender identity, and they're living on the streets. And on the streets, they are extremely vulnerable. And that is a place of vulnerability where human trafficking often preys. So it is a serious problem. I think if we could fix that single problem of LGBTQ youth homelessness, that it would go a long way toward resolving much of the human trafficking problem in general.
Here's a nice question for our audience, I think. Kathy asks, what's the best way for allies to get involved?
Thank you for asking that. I love our allies. I've always believed that if this battle is ever won, it's going to be because the allies stepped up and came to our defense. And the reason I say that is that I could make compelling arguments to individuals who oppose my view, but I can't get many of those people to even stop and listen to me because of the way I dress and the way I identify. I have spent some time down at the legislature in Arizona seeking to talk to legislators about the LGBTQ issues. And I have been denied a meeting based on who I am and what I am there to talk about. That also happened to me at the city level when I wanted to discuss non-discrimination with one of the council members at the city of Scottsdale. So we're struggling with these issues and with the pushback. And I'd like to go back for a moment and address an issue about bills that may come up in the state legislature. There may be hostile bills that are proposed at the state legislature this session. I'm hopeful that the hostile proponents learned from the failed lesson of, I believe it was 2015 when they tried to pass a bathroom bill, that would not be a good idea to try to propose again. But there probably will be a bill to propose that transgender women cannot, or transgender girls can't compete in athletics. And of course, these individuals assume that transgender girls and women are actually biological men. That's certainly what they say to advance their position. And that's a very hostile and insulting thing for them to say, and I'm sure they enjoy saying it for that added reason. There will probably be such a bill to prevent, at least in the school level, transgender girls from competing in athletics within the female gender sport. At the same time, though, there may be good news as far as proposed bills, besides just a proposed bill for non-discrimination. Last year, there was a proposed bill to end what is called conversion therapy. And for those of you who aren't aware of what conversion therapy is, it is a process that is promoted and imposed by people who are hostile to the LGBTQ community for the sake of trying to take someone who identifies as gay or transgender and forcing them through a conversion therapy that by the end of the program is designed to change their orientation or their identity back, presumably, as they put it, to what it was originally intended or what it originally was before something changed that. The whole premise of the conversion therapy is flawed. And the American Medical Association has come out against it as being not only flawed, inappropriate, but also extremely dangerous because many people who are forced to undergo this, or at least forced in the sense as an adult through guilt and ostracizing to participate, end up experiencing depression, and some end up committing suicide. Now, adult rights are pretty broad. So if there is such a bill introduced this session, and I think there will be by advocates who are supportive of the LGBTQ community, it will most likely prohibit conversion therapy in Arizona for minors. And if that is introduced, I encourage all of you to do what you can to become aware of the status of that bill and speak out. Contact your representatives, and even if you can, really do anything you possibly can besides just voting, but also speaking out against conversion therapy, and of course, speak for and supporting the non-discrimination bill that I anticipate will be coming too.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Does anyone want to just unmute themselves and ask a question? I don't have any more in the chat.
I don't see any hands raised. If anyone wants to just take themselves off a visual and raise their hand, please go ahead. Hi, Patty, we can see you.
Hi, thank you. I just had a basic question. Is there a religious freedom law existing now in Arizona?
Yes, there is. There is freedom at the state level and at the federal level. And I think one of the sad ironies is that it's probably duplicative of freedoms that already exist and may have been little more than a stunt to try to advance the personal political goals of the advocates who pushed for it. But with it, it has created additional ammunition to be used against the LGBT community, because after all, the religious issue is ground zero for those of us who are gay or transgender.
Marie, we have one hand raised too in the audience.
I can't see it.
Yeah, I've got it here. It's Ellen Phelan. Elizabeth Phelan. If you could unmute yourself, please, Elizabeth, and ask your question.
And I wish I had a question more than a comment, which is how important it is to help my friends, straight or gay. During this time, I've had not one, but 2 women fall in love with con men on the internet. They both retired when they were over age 70. And it just shows how much we have to meet like this and continue to get to know each other to get us through this pandemic. And definitely, Stanna, I'm inviting you to Apache Junction. I have some girls for you to meet.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Your point is really important, you know, and members of the LGBT community are at even greater risk for cons on the internet, because sadly, people who identify as gay or transgender tend to have a smaller universe of potential companions.
Yes.
You know, one of the things I've learned in a dozen years is that there may be a lot of people who find a person who's gay or transgender attractive and might even want to spend time with them, but they're not willing to do so or take the step to make that happen because of the blowback or pushback they'll receive from their friends or their family. And what ends up happening is that attention for those individuals for the prospect of companionship ends up being a secret, lurid type of thing that perhaps a member of the LGBTQ community might at first not realize, or if they realize it, think that they can work through it so that love will find a way. But in the end, the hostility that is open, not only toward the community, but to those who are sensitive to the community, causes a lot of people who might otherwise want to become romantically involved with somebody who's gay or transgender to avoid ever developing a meaningful relationship. And that, of course, makes people who are part of the community more vulnerable. It's a vicious cycle.
Romance is so attractive. My friend and General Motors engineer, feminist, fell so in love with what simply like a Nigerian letter, a con man. So and then I see my own son is living with a woman. They're trapped together because of the pandemic. she's moved into his house. He can't get her out. She's pregnant. And, that's just what happens. And he's had many gay friends. He's bipolar. He's a difficult person. So we have all kinds of personalities that need a lot of love and support. And I'm all over, getting these laws changed. And I am proud to introduce you to some women who will help you when you find candidates. We're all about getting the right candidates. We are nothing without good candidates. Can be any party, including independent. We will get, I am good for 700 signatures.
Wow, thank you. That's the spirit. I hope others participating today share Elizabeth's enthusiasm and conviction.
Yep. We've got some people who want to adopt babies, and we don't want laws to prevent that.
And just for anyone who hasn't seen it, Miss Marianne, I posted a number of links to advocacy groups, both nationally and statewide, that Stanna provided to me. So if you go into the chat, you can see a number of organizations and groups there that you can refer to look for legal information and other aspects of the LGBTQ community.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to share a final image with everyone. And it goes back to the umbrella analogy that I began this presentation with. The protective umbrellas at the federal, state, and local level. Hopefully, if we do our job right and we succeed in becoming aware and supporting candidates and elected officials who are sensitive to and willing to promote the interests of the LGBT community, we'll achieve unity and a figurative umbrella result that is protective of the whole community and looks something like this. And I choose that because I am a self-proclaimed proud unicorn and member of the Rainbow Coalition and the LGBTQ community. So I leave everyone with that, and hopefully the positive, optimistic perception that the analogy of umbrellas will hopefully allow us to visualize what we can do to make a change for the better in Arizona for the LGBTQ plus community. Again, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this today. And thank you to the sponsors for making it happen.
Thank you, Stanna. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at future presentations. And I'm going to stop the recording now. We will have the recording available at some point in the future on our LWVNAZ website, which is being developed now. And we look forward to seeing you at a future meeting. And thank you so much.